Emotions Matter. Brought to you by emaw.com. That's EMAWW.com. Your solution for emotional intelligence. Thank you for joining me today, your host, Monique, on the Emotions Matter podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome my guest, His Honor Judge Travis Moore. Judge Moore has served as a judge of probate for the Probate Court Department of Greenwood County in South Carolina since 2010. He ran unopposed in the general election for his second term. He has served on the bench for over 6 years. Prior to his 2010 election, he was an attorney for 16 years and worked with the Callison Dorn law firm and also with the Watson law firm. And now I would like to welcome my guest, Judge Moore. Welcome, Your Honor.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Monique.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're so glad you were able to take time out of your very busy schedule and share some of your experience with our audience. In your introduction, I mentioned how before you became a judge, you were a lawyer for many years. What kind of transition did you have to go through from being a lawyer to becoming a judge?
Well, it's interesting. The type of judge that I am, it's elected by the people. Not all judges are elected, popularly elected. So I was elected, and so I stopped being a lawyer on December 31st of 2009 and made the transition the next day to a judge without a lot of formal training. The biggest difference that I could see is that as a lawyer, I was more of an advocate for clients. People would come to me with a particular problem, and I would help them navigate the waters, if you will, in a legal sense, to get whatever problem they had to conclusion. Whereas now, as a judge, I had to switch hats, and I'm more of a mediator, and just to make sure they have fairness. And so that transition wasn't awfully hard, but it was a transition nonetheless.
So there wasn't any additional law or training that you had to know?
Sure, we did go through a training for all of the probate judges that were elected on that year. We went down to Columbia for 3 days, and we got a manual that was supposed to teach us exactly what we were going to experience and how to handle certain problems, both in the law and also in the staff, because as probate judge, not only do we run the courtroom and the legal issues involved, but we also have a staff. Here in the county that I'm in, we have a staff of 5 people, and they do things from probating estates when someone passes away to make sure that the rightful heirs get the property. We deal with mental illness and chemical dependency. We deal with guardianships and conservatorships. And we also, the happy spot in all of that is we do marriage licenses. So we have a wide variety of things that we do. So we learn about how to handle a staff of people as well as the legal side.
You said the happy spot was the marriage license. Is there also the down spot when you do divorces, or is that not in your court?
Divorces are on the other side of the hall. We issue the marriage licenses, so we see them when they're happy. And they might go to the other side of the hallway sometime in their lives, but when they come to us, they're going to live happily ever after. And it's kind of nice to witness the glistening in their eyes. That's been kind of interesting.
Just as a curiosity, have you ever married somebody and then not long after that, you see them down the hall getting a divorce paper? Did they ever stop by and talk to you about any of this? Or is it sort of like, okay, congratulations, and that's the last contact that you might have with them?
That's actually a good question. We have people, we do perform wedding ceremonies in the courtroom for $20. So we have had people go through a wedding ceremony and call us sometimes the same day, Monique, or the next day, and say, have you filed those papers yet? Can we tear them up? And they want to know if it was legal if they never spend a night together? And so we get all kind of questions when it comes to
Wow.
wedding ceremonies. And so
Wow.
I wish that you could be a fly on the wall to see what we deal with. And of course, during my 10 years, when they changed the laws to where we now do same-sex marriages, and so that's added a new dimension to what we do, and we treat them as every other, because they are just the same as any other wedding that we perform.
Wow, that's a very interesting topic on its own. We're not going there today, but that is
Sure.
a very interesting
Sure.
topic. And I was just sitting here thinking, maybe if you charged $100 per marriage license, they might stick around a little longer than 24 hours. See, it's that low rate that you offer, $20. We can forget about the $20.
Yeah. Now for the marriage license it was $45, and we did raise it to $75. So it's $75 to get the license and $20 for the ceremony. So we kind of tested that theory a little bit.
That is so funny. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question because I could probably go on and on this one. Our show is about emotional intelligence and, how we deal with emotions in our daily lives. What is the preparation for a person in your position in staying either emotionally detached or keeping an observant level? How do you prepare yourself for
Sure.
those types of situations?
Well, I think experience comes in, obviously, when you've been around people and see the human dynamics of how they act once they have a loved one pass away and they feel like that there is something rightfully theirs. They feel like their grandmother gave them her locket. That my grandfather wanted me to have his Ford truck that he had forever. It may be something small in nature. It may have a large price tag like the Hilton Head condominium. So you have people coming in, they're not only distraught over losing a loved one, but they also feel like that they are getting a raw deal, and so they're coming here for justice. Personally, as a judge overseeing that type of behavior, there's something that we refer to as called judicial temperament. A lot of times what people want is just a venue to come talk and to air their concerns. So a lot of times what I've found is that when people are upset, when they feel like the system is against them, if they are dealt a bad hand, a lot of times what they want is just somebody to talk to. And so I have to put on my patient's hat, and I will allow people who are going through that emotional roller coaster just some time to vent, some time to talk, even though it may not be directly what we're talking about that particular day in that court case. But we let them go ahead and just say what's on their mind. I think it's very therapeutic for them to have a venue, to have a controlled environment where they can get it off their chest. Now, granted, at the end of the day, I may or may not rule in their favor. I may find some compromise to where all the siblings may get a little piece of what they feel they're entitled to. And a lot of times in probate court, there's no winners. There's sometimes just a matter of how bad you lose, because everybody, when they leave, sometimes feel like they've all lost because everybody wants something. So it's kind of interesting to see how we deal with those situations.
When it comes to the emotional state of someone who is in the courtroom, how much of an influence do you think that has on a lawyer or a judge, or do you really try to separate the feelings from the facts of the situation?
And I think that depends on judge for judge. Whereas I tend to be kind of lenient and allow people to get their emotions out. I think that's good for them, no matter how I rule. There may be some judges that want to go ahead and that has nothing to do with the case. Let's move on. Let's not go there. And it does depend on the case. We recently had 4 siblings in our court that were fighting over mother's estate. None of the 4 children got along. They did until their mother died. One flew in from California. One flew in from Florida. And they just wanted that none of them could get along because they did not feel like her estate was being managed properly by the personal representative. That's also known as an executor in other states. But in South Carolina, it's a personal representative, the person who's been assigned to oversee the estate. So they did not feel that the personal representative was doing things fairly. They all felt jilted. So I was in a hearing, and I think there was two lawyers involved. Two of the sisters did not have lawyers, but it was an all-day hearing that they came from every part of the country to have their grievances heard. That was very emotional, and we got into the facts and the details of the case. But just because you don't like the way somebody dealt with a situation doesn't mean that it was done wrong. You may not like the way that it's done because that's the way that the law is, but it was an emotional day of testimony, and it was kind of sad because their dad was still living. He was there in the courtroom, and he witnessed his 4 daughters fighting like this. And I'm sure it was upsetting him, and he was not of the mental state to really handle the estate. So he was just more of an observer, and I thought how sad it would be to be him and to witness this.
Did he say anything?
But that's an example. He did try to testify, but we had some Kleenex close, and I think he just wanted some closure. But it was kind of emotional for everybody involved.
How long do cases usually run? Is there a time limit in the court for cases?
We normally estimate how long a case will take by talking to the lawyers and the parties involved. So in this particular case, we estimated it would take about 4 or 5 hours. We started it in the morning, and it wound up going all day. We did take a lunch break. And if anybody gets emotional, we always take 5-10 minutes, let them compose themselves, and we'll go back on the record. But we're very lenient as far as letting people catch their breath. We won't go through. And sometimes cases are set for an hour. They may go 3 hours, 4 hours.
For however long you need.
Sure, and as long as there's not another case on the docket that day.
Mm-hmm.
But we try to keep that to a minimum when we're setting a case because they do tend to go over sometimes.
Was there ever a case for you personally where you really got caught up on making a decision where your emotions might have become entangled more than you expected, and maybe you had to walk away from the case or, try to do something to kind of get you back on track?
Sure. I don't know as far as walking away from a case, but there's been many cases where I have to take it under advisement. What that means is before making a ruling in front of the litigants who are there, they spend a day or 2 days or 3 days arguing their case, and they want to hear what the judge is going to decide. A lot of times I'll just take it under advisement, and that's for a couple reasons. Number one, I kind of want to make sure that their feelings, that they can decompress a little bit before they hear what the ruling is going to be. That's number one. Number two, it gives me time to think about the facts of the case and kind of apply it to the law. A lot of times I do have to go back and research what the law is, how do the facts apply to the law before I make a decision. But we've had I've often said in this job, 95% of the job is pretty easy, but it's the 5% that will keep me awake at night. And so I have had several of those 5% cases in the past year or so. The one that comes to my mind, I spent a long time thinking about this case. I'm going to not use the real names, obviously. But there was a husband and wife. They're married. They have 2 children. The wife is 43 years old, and she has a heart attack. She loses oxygen to her brain, and so she's never going to regain her full mental capabilities. She's basically needs help to get dressed. She needs help to feed herself. She goes through a lot of physical therapy. And there's something in South Carolina law, and I would imagine that most states have something similar, but in South Carolina it's called a guardianship. When somebody is unable to care for themselves and they don't have a power of attorney, somebody can petition the court to take care of that person. In this case, she was living with her husband, and her husband was acting as her guardian. He was making decisions. Her parents, the wife's parents, live next door to these people. And they noticed that through the months, her weight started to decline. Her poor health only got poorer. They did not feel that the husband was making decisions that were in their daughter's best interest. And so they let that go on for a while, and they went and got a lawyer, and they petitioned the court here to remove the husband as her guardian and asked for an order to remove their daughter from the marital home so they could take care of her. So the decision that I had to make was, is there enough evidence, medical evidence, to show that, number one, that she was not being taken care of, number two, the parents who were elderly Could they take care of their daughter's needs? What effect would this have on the children if I remove the mother from their marital home? And so that was a very tough decision. Whenever you talk about moving involuntarily moving a spouse away from another spouse, that's not something to be taken lightly. So one day I did do an order instructing the sheriff's department to move the wife to the parents' house. So that was a big event when they went and knocked on the door and said, "We're here to get Jane Doe and move her next door." And that was very tough. The husband had a tough time with it. And I don't know what impact the kids had on the kids, but we made that decision. And in hindsight, you always wonder if it's the right decision. But I do feel that she is well taken care of now. From what I've heard is she's gained weight. She can now feed herself and do some things that she could not do. So I feel like it was a fine decision. But then again, you never know. But that was a very emotional case. And but it's just one that sticks in my mind as one that kept me awake at night, many a nights.
It must be comforting, though, to know that she seems to be thriving in that new situation.
And that's true. And I don't know where I got that information, but people deal with our court, and that might only be one side. The other side may claim that she's not thriving. I don't know. And that's one thing I have learned about this job and also practicing law is that there's two sides to every situation. What may look crystal clear by talking to somebody, maybe, once you hear the other side, it may change your mind. So you do learn that there is the law is a lot of gray area.
So how does one deal with the results of that? What kind of mindset do you need to put yourself into? Because I wonder, too, do they even train you on these? Is this even a discussion, in the training of law or to help prepare you for this type of career?
I don't think we learned anything practical in law school. We spent 3 years reading cases and learning different types of law. But I don't think they prepare you for, number one, the business side of being a lawyer or the emotional side. But I will tell you that I started my law career with a lawyer named Marvin Watson here in Greenwood, South Carolina. And I never will forget the advice he gave me on the first day. I came into the office the first day for my first day on the job. I'm finally going to be a lawyer. I'm going to set the world on fire. And he called me into his office and he said, "Travis," he said, "here's the key to being a lawyer." He said, "You're going to win cases you should lose and you're going to lose cases you should win, but you just keep going." I really didn't know what he meant by that. But the longer I'm in it, that's kind of held true. A lot of times you don't get the results that you think you should get. And then you just keep going. From a judge's standpoint, I've been around it for a while. Both my father was a judge, so I was able to witness him and how he dealt with some difficult cases. And I think that's probably helped me deal with certain cases. I think that as a litigant, for that case in particular, in every case, there are checks and balances. So if the husband of that lady felt like I had made a wrong decision, if he felt like he did not get a fair trial, if he felt like I made the wrong decision as it applied to the law, he had the option to appeal my case to the circuit court and have another judge look at the transcript to look at, and no, it was not appealed, but he could have. And then if they would have found against him, they could have taken it to the Court of Appeals and then the state Supreme Court. So there are ways that you could try to get justice if you feel like that justice was not given. So that's one way they could handle it.
That's also kind of a comforting thought then for someone in your position, is that while your judgment there might be final in that situation, that there are other avenues that can be explored by the people involved if they're not satisfied with that decision. Is there guilt involved sometimes? Do you ever feel guilty? Or do you ever feel regretful maybe of a decision that you've made? Or do you always say, this is the best decision?
I don't know if I would ever say that I regretted a decision. I think there's been times, or most times, I'm like, well, I hope I made the right decision. I think I did. But you just don't know. But I also keep that in the back of my mind that I've got to do the best that I can do. with the facts that were given to me and the evidence that was given to me. And if I make a wrong decision, then, the other side can appeal it and it can be overturned on appeal. And that would not hurt my feelings if that ever happened. To my knowledge, I don't think I've ever had one overturned on appeal. But it wouldn't hurt my feelings if it did, because I don't mind saying that I'm wrong occasionally. I don't think that I've ever regretted a decision. Now, there have been times that the facts, the law wasn't what I wanted it to be, and I had to make a decision contrary to what I wanted because the law was different. But that's different.
Yeah, and you have to stick with the law. At the end of the day, it's the law.
That's correct. I'm bound and determined and take an oath to follow the law of the Constitution of the state of South Carolina and the United States Constitution. And that's what I have to do. And
so in terms of the highest court of appeals, is that the Supreme Court? So once it goes through there, that decision is final. Nobody can repeal it. Nobody can do anything about it. That's it.
That's it. The state of South Carolina Supreme Court is the final stopping place for state issues. If it was a federal issue, then it would go to the United States Supreme Court. That's correct.
Are there any popular cases that you've monitored and had a different decision or different outcome in your mind if you were handling that case?
A lot of times, I watch movies and TV shows and occasionally some cases on TV, and I wonder, how are they getting by with that? You can't make that objection. And so it's kind of hard for me to watch and enjoy those shows because I might do things differently. And I also understand that it might be in a different state that has different rules and regulations when it comes to evidence and trial. So I keep that in mind, but I don't really second guess any decisions.
When you think of a courtroom, there's a lot of people that are generally involved. And what is their effect on the situation at hand? Does their participation or their presence change the atmosphere or the emotional state at all?
Yeah, well, you asked the question earlier about the emotions of the judge, about how I deal with that. I think that's also true of the emotions of a case on a jury. When I say I witnessed, I watched it on TV with America with the O.J. Simpson case. That was in the mid-'90s, if I'm not mistaken. I was fresh out of law school, so I found it fascinating. I don't know if I watched every single day, but I watched a lot of it. But it was certainly an emotionally charged case. Not only were the facts interesting, you had a famous celebrity football player who was the defendant, and you had his wife and another individual who were the victims, and there was a lot of graphic testimony. And you talk about how a judge may have to stay emotionally detached. I think about the jury in that case. They listened to, I don't know how many months that case went on. I always say there's 12 people that saw all the facts in the case. Everybody else just saw it on the news, even though it was televised. And they came to a unanimous verdict of not guilty, which I think surprised a lot of people. But I'll never know if that was the right verdict or the wrong verdict, so I'm not casting any judgment on their judgment. I just think it's interesting how juries also are charged with the task not to let emotion come in, but listen to the facts as they're presented. The judge will tell you the law, and then you apply that law to the facts. And so I think that might have been very hard. You can think about them. They were sequestered, which means they were in a hotel room during the duration of the trial. You can only imagine what they thought of when they were going to be released from sequestration, as to what the media may be standing outside the courtroom door. They'll be bombarded for interviews. They had to really feel firm in their position, and it was not guilty, which is a lot of people were surprised by that. And so that's just one case when I think of a national case and where emotions are involved, because that was probably one of the highest that I can remember.
You mentioned the media. Do you think they had any influence on the outcome?
I don't know if they could influence the outcome, but I think it could certainly influence the witnesses' behavior if they know that they're going to be on television, especially if they know it's going to be nationally televised. It could influence the judge, a particular judge. I would like to think it would not influence me. I've never had a TV camera in the courtroom. But I think that, you get to the point where the judge or the witnesses may want to play to the camera rather than making sure that there's a fair trial. And that's one, but there's also the public's right to know. It's an open courtroom. So there's a balance when it comes to the media coverage of a trial. And I've never had to deal with that, thankfully, in probate court. But there is a test that you do when a media wants to bring a camera in. They have to make a motion, and you have to have a hearing and determine if it can be aired publicly.
Are there any, in your experience, that you would have found to have been an extremely tough case for anybody to have handled?
One of the first cases I handled as probate judge, it was probably my second or third week on the job. One of the jobs of probate judge is to handle chemically dependent individuals, involuntary. So if you have a loved one, a friend, a family member who you feel has a substance abuse problem, whether it's alcohol, or whether it's opioids, whether it's cocaine, what have you, there is a procedure where you can file paperwork to have that person involuntarily committed to a treatment facility, either inpatient or outpatient. With that being said, it was my second or third week on the job. I don't think I'd even heard one of these cases. But I was on my lawnmower on a Saturday. A white pickup truck came into my driveway, and it was somebody that I knew from the community. And they said, "We need help. Our daughter is 20 years old. She is in Self-Regional Hospital. She has a needle sticking out of her arm, and they say that she may lose her arm, but she's not letting us visit with her. But we need to get her help because we think she's going to die if you can't help." And this was a girl that was an honor student. She was in college, homecoming queen. She was Miss Everything in high school, but just made some wrong choices in college, failed out of college, and was heading down the wrong path. So I got to work on Monday and talked to my staff who knew what was going on, knew how to work the system. I was brand new and I had no clue. And I said, "We've got to expedite this. We've got to get it to a hearing, and we've got to have a hearing." So in this hearing, you have a psychiatrist, and you also have an expert from a facility that is a rehabilitation place. Here it's Cornerstone Rehabilitation. So the way you do it, you bring in the person who they're trying to get help. So the 20-year-old did come in from the hospital. Her parents were there across from me, who I knew, and you had a psychiatrist and an expert in the chemical dependency field. They make recommendations to me as to what should be done, and both of the experts, in this case, I knew that the parents had already arranged a treatment facility in Alabama that was very expensive. There was a private plane waiting at the airport to take their daughter to this treatment facility, and we had the hearing. A lot of tears were shed. I was brand new, and not only was I a brand new judge, I had a 4-year-old daughter. So I was looking at it as a parent as well. Both of the experts felt that although their daughter, the 20-year-old, was using drugs, that she was not using it to a degree that made her chemically dependent. At least they didn't have enough evidence to say that she is depending on these drugs. Merely using drugs does not mean you're dependent. So the first threshold in the law is that you got to have testimony from at least one person to say this person is chemically dependent. Both the psychiatrist and the specialist from the Cornerstone said she is a user of drugs, but there's nothing in the medical record to show that she's dependent on drugs. So the law says that by law, I have to dismiss the case and allow her to walk away from that hearing. And I remember sitting there looking at the parents, and they looked flabbergasted. Tears are flowing down their eyes, and I actually had a few tears in my eyes. And I said, I have no choice, but I have to dismiss the case.
Wow.
And so I followed the law because the law was clear. You have to have one person say that she's chemically dependent. We didn't have that. And the law goes further to say if you don't have that, the judge must dismiss it. So I had no discretion. And so that's kind of a hard pill for the family to swallow. And I'm sure that then I've talked with them, after that, and I was apologetic. I'm sorry the system didn't work for you. But, I kind of sit here today, and just like you do, you kind of know what should have happened. And so that was a tough case. And that was my second or third week on the job.
What a christening.
Yes, granted, I hadn't had that many bad ones since then. So. But the highlight of that story, it's been 6 years now, and I think that young lady is doing well. I've talked to her parents, and I ask about her, and that's the beauty of living in a small town. I can say, how's she doing? And they say she's doing wonderful. And so, looks like she's got her life back on track, which is great.
Thank you for sharing that bit of information that is not, maybe that was just the wake-up call that young lady needed. Maybe, wow. Right. Yeah, it seems to me, would you agree then, the law doesn't take into consideration emotions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would like to think that it's detached from that. I think it's based totally on the facts. You have witnesses who are crying. You have defendants who are pleading, for their life. And the way that it's set up is that it is based solely on the facts of the case. And sometimes it's hard when you have somebody that's crying and it's emotional. And, I deal with emotional subjects. Who's going to take care of grandmother who has dementia? Who's going to balance her checkbook? Who's going to take care of, the wife who's losing weight because of the heart attack? I deal with those situations. And so really you have to, although there are emotions involved, you try to follow the law and do what's best. You might get some skewed results from a legal standpoint if you do follow emotions. If you let emotions make the decisions, then that may be considered, and I know it's a buzzword nowadays, but judicial activism. And you want to avoid that. The judges should be away from that. It should be based on the law totally and not as to who is the most emotional or who has the best story. And it should be based on total facts of the case.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see where that would lead into a lot of conflict otherwise. Yeah, separate your facts from your feelings, acknowledge the feelings, but you have to really deal with the facts.
That's correct.
We have a listener, and let's get to her question here. Her name is Wendy, and she's from Denver. And it says that she's very troubled and doesn't know if she should try to make her elderly parent go to a nursing home. She says she doesn't have power of attorney, but knows that that parent is not taking good care of themselves. She's afraid also that they might get hurt, and if she wonders if she would also be liable, even if she's not the power of attorney, like would it fall on her if something does happen to the parent? Do you have any advice on how she should proceed with her parent in trying to get her into a nursing home, or what her possible outlets might be? Now, I know this is a different state altogether, but is there some kind of commonality or advice that you could give her?
Sure. And what I would tell Wendy is, if she's living in Denver, what I say is only South Carolina law. I have no clue what Denver or Colorado law is. So I'm going to tell her what we would advise her to do in South Carolina. Along the same lines, as a judge, I cannot technically give legal advice. I can talk about the guardianship process, which she may want me to talk about. But I would advise her to get a lawyer in Colorado who can give her the advice that she may need. But, in South Carolina, as I mentioned earlier, there is a guardianship process that she could come to the court and say, I'm worried about my mother. Her health is deteriorating. And I'm afraid that she is going to get hurt because she may leave the stove on. She may have, I don't know what her diagnosis may be, if it's dementia, if it's just Parkinson's disease, blindness or whatnot. If she knows that she cannot take care of herself, she may want to look at getting a guardianship. In South Carolina, she would have to come up to a probate court in the county that she resides and file the proper paperwork to say, my mother has been diagnosed with A, B, and C, that I'm her daughter and I've been taking care of her for X number of years. And I would like to make medical decisions and decisions on her behalf because I no longer think she's capable of doing that. She would also be instructed to bring 2 doctor statements who state that she cannot take care of her own affairs. So the judge in that county would take that into consideration, the medical evidence that 2 doctors, one being a family doctor, is very strong to say that she may need help doing these things. And then we would appoint her mother a guardian ad litem That guardian ad litem is the judge's eyes and ears, and they can investigate and they can ask questions. They can talk to other family members to say, what do you think about Wendy becoming guardian? Do you have any objections to Wendy becoming guardian? Do you know anybody else who may want to become guardian? And that guardian ad litem will come to court and testify to the judge to say, I have investigated this situation, and I do think Wendy is the best person to serve as her guardian. Then sometimes they come to court and say, well, I think that, Brother Bob is a better option because he's living next to Mom and he's the more responsible one. And so that's what she would need to do. Wendy would need to go ahead and explore that avenue of establishing a guardianship. And there's also another area in the law called conservatorship. That would allow her to take over Mother's finances, to balance the checkbook, to pay the bills. So a guardianship is over the person. The conservatorship is over the money. Conservatorship, you conserve the money. So you want to make sure that both those things could be explored if needed, because a lot of people, you hear of elderly abuse, you hear of vulnerable adults. It's very easy to take advantage of elderly individuals who may be slipping a little bit, whether it's the TV evangelist or whether it's the gutter salesman coming to the door, knocking on the door and having the mom or the dad write checks and just depleting their assets, which they would need when they get to a nursing home. And we see that a lot. So there are avenues that Wendy could explore that would help give her the protection that her mom needs.
Oh, that's wonderful advice. Yeah. Is there any advice that you could offer us to help us prepare for these kinds of potential situations in our future?
I would advise anybody to, number one, don't be afraid to go to a lawyer. There are tons of information online. You can look up how to make a will online. You can look up how to do a power of attorney online. You can look up on how to do a living will online. But unless it's geared towards your particular state, it may not be effective. So although you can Google it and you can find information, and it may even say valid in all 50 states, that doesn't mean that it is. And I think people will find when you ask a local lawyer that their fees would not be much higher than what you would get online. So I think the protection that you have from a lawyer to do both a will and power of attorney, living will, you have that protection. So the way I look at it is like, Monique, you've worked your entire life. You and your husband may have a house, you may have bank accounts, you may have assets. And so you get to direct where you want those items to go. If you don't have a will, the state's going to tell the individual where those items are going to go. And it really decreases conflict when the family has clear instructions from someone that, okay, my parent wants it to be handled this way. And it sets it out. So the children do know how they wanted it. Same thing with power of attorney. We've talked about guardianship and conservatorship. If there is a power of attorney, there's not a need to go through a guardianship or conservatorship. For example, my parents are still alive. They've made me their their power of attorney. So I can, if needed, if they ever become incapacitated for whatever reason, I can talk to the bank. I can pay their bills. I can access their information. I could sell their house and use those assets to a nursing home without having to come get a guardianship or conservatorship because they've already appointed me as power of attorney. And so those are things that all your listeners can actually do to make sure that it's a smooth transition. Because with death, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Yeah. So it's going to happen. So it's good to go ahead and be prepared. That's a great question.
Oh, that's excellent advice. Really excellent advice. So tell us, Judge, when you deal with cases like, for example, the mentally ill, you talked about drug dependency earlier and elderly folks, but the mentally ill is a total different realm, correct?
Correct. And we deal with the mentally ill just like we do involuntary commitments for chemically dependent to get them help. We deal with the mental illness side too, to have someone involuntarily committed for the mentally ill. And there's such a stigma in society with the mentally ill, and it's poorly funded. We don't have the facilities that we need to treat those problems, and that's an ongoing thing that we deal with on a weekly basis. I travel to wherever the Greenwood resident lands. If it's in Columbia, if it's in Greenville, if it's in the hospital here in Greenwood, I go each week to make sure that that person, they're not holding that person against their will, and there's a valid reason for them to stay in that facility.
How do you handle situations, though, in making decisions? Is it the same way that you would make it with the young lady who was sort of accused by their parents of having a chemical dependency?
It's very similar. The way that I've explained it to my daughter, who's now 11 years old, I've explained it that, part of my job is to make sure people get the medicine they need. She sees some mentally ill people around town that she knows that I've dealt with. They may come up and talk to me. They may be on the sidewalk shouting at every car that passes, but I explained to her that I've worked with that person, and it's my job to make sure they get the help that they need and the medicine that they need. And so that's kind of the way that I look at it. It's just part of the process, and it's actually helping people, even though the person may not feel they need help.
Do you find that those cases tend to be tougher, though, in terms of the emotional involvement there? Is it harder to deal with mentally ill cases?
You do see some sad situations. We have several cases where people have a fixed delusion, which is something I was not familiar with. But it is someone who feels that the dentist implanted her with a microchip, and she feels that there's people following her all the time. So she comes up to the courthouse about 2 or 3 times a day to give me letters because she thinks there's some code and that I'm her safety spot. And she also emails me 2 or 3 times a day because she feels very anxious, very stressed that people are following her. And there's no medicine that can help that. There's medicine that can help the anxiety, but there's no medicine that can actually fix her condition of a fixed delusion. So that's pretty sad situations that we deal with. And all I can do is comfort her and just tell her that I thank her for getting me the information. I will put it in her file.
Oh, wow. If somebody's mentally ill, I'm just curious, can you put a mentally ill person to death if they committed a heinous crime like that?
Wow, that's a big topic and a big discussion as to whether you can execute a mentally ill person. And ironically, one of the leading cases, which may still be on appeal at the United States Supreme Court, derived from Greenwood County. It was a elementary school shooting back in the 80s where a fellow named Jamie Wilson came into the elementary school, opened fire in the cafeteria, went into the bathroom, reloaded, and came back out. A PE teacher stopped him, and he was tried, and he was found guilty. He actually pled guilty. South Carolina had a statute called guilty but mentally ill. And the trial judge, which ironically was my dad, I don't even know if you were aware of that when you asked the question, but my dad was the judge that actually sentenced him to the electric chair, which has been appealed, I know, several times to the United States Supreme Court. It's been the subject of debate, and that may still be going on. So I guess if anybody is interested in that, they can Google Jamie Wilson, Greenwood, South Carolina, and find out what comes up. I've not done that, so I don't know what's out there, but I do know that he's still on death row, and that occurred back in, I believe, 1988 or 89. Was when the crime was committed.
Wow. Yeah, those seem to be cases that would be very difficult to rule over because you just don't know who are you judging? Are you judging the person or have they been, sort of possessed by their mental illness? So that's a tough one.
And I would imagine, and I was not in the courtroom, so I don't know, but I imagine a lot of it dealt with what the psychiatrist testified to. There's a lot of different types of mental illness. Did he know the difference between right and wrong when he went in there? Did he have a plan? Did he have the ability to stop what he wanted to do? Was he that cognizant that he could do that? There's a lot of questions that none of us would know. And so it's a difficult case. And I've never really talked to my dad about it, but I'm sure that weighed heavily on his mind as well.
Oh, yes, definitely. It sounds to me when I hear you talk, you have a passion for what you're doing. You'd have to have a passion, to stay in it as long as you have. So my question here for you is, when will your term expire? And if it does, do you plan on running again?
Sure. In South Carolina, probate judges are elected every 4 years. My second term is going to expire next year. So next year is my reelection, 2018. I certainly plan to run for reelection. This is a job that I really do enjoy. I enjoy coming to work every day. I enjoy the people I work with. I enjoy the work that I do and helping people in the community. It's stressful at times, but I really do enjoy it. I feel like I do help people, even though a lot of the situations we deal with are very emotional. I do, at the end of the day, feel like I've done some good, which is a good feeling.
Well, I want to thank you again for sharing your experience and being so candid about the situations that you've witnessed and helping us to kind of have a better idea of what the court of law does, because I think we are often misled by what we see in the media or these reality TV shows. I guess my takeaway today is that, yes, there's a lot of feelings that are going to be involved in these situations, very intense feelings, in fact. But at the end of the day, it's the law, and that's what you have to follow.
Sure. And another thing to keep in mind is, since I'm publicly elected, I actually work for the people. So people seem to be intimidated to even call and ask questions to our court, when really that's what we're here. The taxpayer money pays for our court, so it's open to them. It's an open court. Anybody can come in and talk to my staff about any of the issues, and we're here to help. And a lot of people feel it's different when you go to a courtroom, but that's kind of what I want to, everybody to know, that it's okay to call up here and ask my staff questions, or in the county that you live in, because the court actually works for you. You're a taxpayer, so. That's just one benefit that I think people need to take advantage of.
Well, that is very helpful and very encouraging. And again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Monique.
And thank you for joining me, your host, Monique, on the Emotions Matter podcast.